Hey everybody, I'm taking a break from the normal channel format. I kind of want to speak from my heart on a certain issue, and I'm not going to get too overly deep in this. More and more I see videos of people filming police, filming their traffic stops, filming their interactions with officers, and overwhelmingly I think that's great. I think it's good, and I believe that it highlights police when they're doing an excellent job, and it highlights police when they're doing terrible jobs. And quite frankly, I wish we had more of that in the public sector. People who are employed as a public servant and serving the public, they need to be accountable to make sure that they're actually serving the public and not serving their own self-interest. So I think that's great. I think it's wonderful. I think that it has opened a lot of eyes in recent years as to the realities on the ground, both positive and negative. Unfortunately, we tend to focus on the negative ones because, as with all things in life, nobody really cares. People don't care a whole lot about all the things you get right and all the things that you're doing that you're just supposed to do. People only care when you mess up. Most of us go through life like a bus driver. Like when you're riding on a bus, the passengers of the bus typically just don't care about how many correct turns the bus driver makes. You know, a bus driver can drive for hours and hours and hours on end and get everything right, and the passengers really don't care. Why? Because he's just doing his job, right? That's what he's supposed to do. He makes one mistake, one wrong turn, one slip up, wreck the bus. Everybody cares. It doesn't matter that he made hundreds of turns correctly. The one turn he made incorrectly is the one that matters, right? And it's sort of the same thing with public servants, and and with us too, right? So just a couple of things about traffic stops, and I'm not trying to politicize or tell people what to do. I'm just saying be smart. So first of all, anytime they give you a citation or a ticket and they sign it to you, doesn't mean you're guilty. I mean, you can have your day in court. Plead not guilty if you're not guilty. If you've done nothing wrong, plead not guilty and go tell the judge. Because pretty much if you've done nothing wrong, go to the court and have your day in court. Certainly a hell of a lot better than having your day in a funeral home, right? It's not worth it. Take your fight. See, and here's the thing. When it's just you and a police officer, if you disagree with the police officer, at that moment, you don't have an audience. You don't have people on the sideline cheering for you. Go get. You can on Facebook Live, but the thing is, none of those people are there, so it doesn't make sense. It's not a competition when a police officer is at your window, because I can promise you he's gonna win. He's got far more at his disposal to win that little battle than you do, right? So just be smart. But that being said, being smart means to know your rights. And a lot of people just don't seem to get this or understand this or realize this. You have your Miranda rights starting from the moment their lights come on. And pretty much at all times, your Miranda rights are active. You just have to invoke them. And even if you don't invoke them, they're implied to be invoked until you voluntarily waive them. So you have the right to remain silent. But the second you answer a question from the police officer, you're waiving your right to remain silent. The second you say anything, it's assumed that you don't wish to remain silent. And that's something that's very strange and weird to do, because police officers come up and they say, "Hey, how you doing?" Good. Okay, well, you're not going to stay silent then, right? But the second when an officer shows up at your car window, they come and they say, "I'm Officer Bob. The reason I pulled you over is for going 70 and a 60. May I have your license and your registration?" And then they run your license and check the plates on your car, and then they come back and they say, "Here's your citation. Please sign the citation as to say that you did indeed receive it. It is not an admission of guilt. You can appear in court and enter your plea at the time you appear in court, and that's whenever you plead not guilty or take defensive driving or deferred adjudication or whatever it is you want to do, right? You're just acknowledging the fact that this police officer gave you a ticket, But this is why you need to be very, very careful about what you say to the officer, because outside of that, everything else is completely unnecessary. And you should not engage the police officer in any kind of conversation, because that whole phrase, everything you say can and will be used against you, is true. Nothing you say will be used to prove your innocence, not by the state. Everything you say will go against you. Plus, not only that, in the court setting, everything that the police officer says is considered sworn testimony, but everything that you say that he said is hearsay. So if you say the officer came up to me and said, you know, I blah 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 blah, if you say that, it's objectable because it's considered hearsay. But whenever the police officer gets up and says, you know, I walked up and the officer said, "Here, officer, would you like a blunt?" They accept that as sworn testimony. So the cards are stacked against you from the very beginning. Anyways, there's tons of other videos out there that can tell you in far more detail about the reasons why you should never speak to police. Politely decline to talk. And they say, "Do you have any idea how fast you're going?" You say, I prefer not to answer questions, officer." "What? You don't answer questions?" "Yes, sir. At this time I'm stating that I don't want to answer questions." "Well, why don't you want to answer questions?" I don't answer questions. What's the reason for the stop?" And if he continues on and say, "I've repeatedly said that I don't want to answer questions. At this time I wish to remain silent." You don't answer questions. Do not roll your window all the way down. They always ask you to roll your window all the way down. Don't do it. Why? Because the second your window goes all the way down, you are waiving your Fourth Amendment right against search and seizures. So when you roll the window all the way down, you're giving up that right. And that's whenever they get to look into the car and say, "Is that child seat buckled properly? It doesn't look like it's buckled properly. I might have to write you a ticket for it if you want to let me check that car seat," right? So never roll your window all the way down. Always just crack it. Give them the license and registration. You don't have to speak to them. If you have your license and registration ready, you crack your window, you hang it out the window, and you don't say anything. Or you say, I'd prefer to remain silent, thank you. And that's it. If he continues on, just say, "What's the reason for the stop?" Okay. You know, it's the police officer's duty to stop you and to identify you. If you're suspected of a crime, carry out a reasonable investigation as to whether or not a crime has been committed. Yes, that includes speeding. If speeding's not technically a crime, it doesn't go on your criminal history, but it is still a petty misdemeanor. They can still stop you for it. They can still write you a ticket for it. They can take your driver's license. It's just they're trying not to be dicks and making it a permanent part of your criminal history, right? So you're welcome on that. Like that's where the state's actually being nice in that regard. Plus the fact you can always take it to court and argue it and get it dismissed, because chances are, unless you're a total asshole, the cop's not going to remember you. They go back to the car and they write down notes. So, you know, whenever he goes back and starts writing stuff down about you, he may write something like, you know, suspect invoked his rights, would not answer questions, etc. You know, make sure that whatever it is that he goes back there and writing, make sure he's not writing, "This dickhead needs to fry" if he ever goes to court. Because if he ever writes something like that and you decide to go to court and he goes back and sees what he wrote about you, he just might show up ready to stick it to you. So just remember that. Anyways, that's about all I got. Please don't do anything stupid when police officers show up at your door, car door, or even your house door. Don't be stupid. They're there to conduct an investigation. You don't have to talk. You don't have to speak to them. Chances are you do need to identify yourself if they ask you to provide identification. But that doesn't mean that you can't question them on it. Just say, what's the purpose for needing my ID? Especially if you're not actively a suspect, right? And be like, I'm not involved in that. Sorry. And the other thing is to say, if I'm not being detained, then I'd like to leave. So may I leave? Am I free to go? is always a good one. Never answer questions. Ask if why he's talking to you. So you want to say, okay, okay. So sum this up. Don't answer questions. Period. You have the right to remain silent. Don't answer questions, number one, because everything else that follows that is an attempt to get you to waive your rights. So get it right from the get-go. You say, I don't answer questions. I'd like to remain silent. If they want your ID, give them your ID. Unless if you got a warrant out for your arrest, sure, there's reason to be upset. But outside of that, give them your ID. If they want to say something like, is this your current address? Say, that's the address on my ID. You don't have to tell them anything. And you shouldn't. Because as I said before, everything you say will only be used against you. Nothing you say can actually be used for you. Literally, it cannot and will not. So don't do it. Yeah. Roll down, crack your window, don't roll it all the way down. Give them your license, don't be stupid. Ask them what the purpose of the traffic stop is. And then if things get out of hand, if he gets froggy, if he starts bucking back at you, and you've given him your ID, he or she, sorry, if you've given him or her your ID, and they continue asking questions, say, I'd rather not answer questions. I don't want to answer questions. Why don't you want to answer questions? I don't answer questions to police officers. They notice that. I have the right to remain silent, don't I? Okay then. And yeah, that's it. And if they push the issue, just say, I'd like to speak to my attorney before, I always say, I'm willing to comply. I'm not refusing to comply. I'm willing to. But before I do, I'd like to make a phone call to my attorney who represents me and have a conversation with my attorney about this. Just be sure. So I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, but I have the right to consult with my attorney, and I'd like to do that before we continue. I'm not trying to impede your investigation. I'm not. I'm just taking care of myself too. Anyways, that's it. Just please don't be stupid. Don't be one of these people that ends up on YouTube as a viral video. Just crack your window, give them your ID, don't answer questions, and be polite. That's all you have to do. So thank you very much for listening. I'll see you on the next video.